Isabella had always looked down on me as a live-in husband. On our wedding anniversary, I caught her cheating with Grant and even heard Grant insult her, saying, "She's wilder in bed than anyone." When I asked her about it, she flat out denied it. Later, in the VIP room, Grant and another person deliberately made things difficult for me, forcing me to drink a disgusting concoction. Isabella even joined them in scolding me, telling me to get on your knees and apologize. After I revealed my true identity, they were terrified, begging for mercy on their knees. And she, crying and kneeling, begged for reconciliation, but I directly refused. Finally, after her company went bankrupt, she stabbed Grant, and she ended up spending the rest of her life in prison. While covering a shift and serving drinks to guests, I passed by the restroom. Just then, I heard a man's teasing, smirking voice from inside. "Grant, how's Fairview's reigning beauty taste?" My steps faltered. "Just alright, I guess. Don't let her cool, goddess-like facade fool you, she's wilder in bed than anyone." Another man's voice spoke, likely the one called Grant. Grant's tone was dismissive, clearly gloating about his conquest. "But when she practically throws herself at you, you'd be a fool not to play along. The best part is, she was still a virgin when I was with her for the first time." Huh. By the end, the man called Grant was laughing smugly. Hearing this, the man who had initiated the conversation also burst into laughter. Like a bolt from the blue, I stood frozen in disbelief. The Fairview's reigning beauty they were talking about wasn't my Isabella, was it? While I was stunned, the two men from the restroom walked out, arms slung around each other's shoulders. Seeing me blocking the doorway, one of them impatiently yelled at me, "Get out of the way." I recognized him as the one who had spoken first. And I also recognized his identity. Kyle. Fairview's notorious trust fund kid. Also a regular guest at our hotel. The arrogant man next to him must be Grant. Kyle usually acts high and mighty, relying on his father's dirty money. But today, his attitude towards Grant was clearly fawning and flattering, making it obvious that Grant's status was far from simple. But I truly didn't know when Fairview got a big shot named Sullivan. Kyle waited for a long time, but found me still standing there frozen. He couldn't help but frown, saying in a fit of rage and embarrassment, "What are you staring at, bumpkin? Are you deaf, you idiot? Or blind? Get lost." With that, Kyle forcefully shoved me aside with his shoulder. My body swayed violently, and I instinctively reached out to steady the wobbling wine bottle on my tray. It wasn't uncommon for people to act entitled just because they had a bit of money and power, especially in a place like this bar, which attracted all sorts. So normally, I wouldn't take their harsh words and insults to heart. But today, an inexplicable anger welled up inside me. I tried my best to remain calm, suppressing the urge to throw a punch. Kyle and Grant swaggered past me. I wondered if it was just my imagination. As he passed me, I distinctly felt Kyle's gaze linger on me for a few seconds, thoughtfully fixed on my name tag. Then a meaningful smirk played on his lips. After delivering the drinks to the guests, I exited the room. My footsteps felt unusually heavy. My mind involuntarily replayed the conversation between Kyle and Grant. There couldn't be a second reigning beauty in Fairview, so I was certain they were talking about my Isabella. After much deliberation, I couldn't resist pulling out my cell phone, wanting to confirm with Isabella. The phone rang for a long time before it was answered. However, as soon as it connected, Isabella's impatient voice came through. "I'm busy. You'd better have a good reason to call." My hand involuntarily tightened around the cell phone. Isabella's attitude towards me had always been like this. It was as if even listening to me was a waste of her time. Swallowing the bitter ache in my throat, I asked, "Isabella, I want to ask you, do you know someone named Grant?" The person on the other end of the line clearly paused, then quickly denied it. "What Grant? I don't know anyone. Ethan, I'm not like you, with nothing to do all day. Do you have any idea how busy I am? Don't bother me with such trivial questions again." After saying that, Isabella hung up the phone. Hearing Isabella's denial, I should have been happy, but for some reason, I couldn't feel happy at all. Isabella's reaction just now seemed more like an indignant denial and a clumsy attempt to cover something up. Just then, the manager's voice came through my earpiece, saying a guest specifically requested me to deliver drinks. It was normal for guests to order drinks, but it was unusual for them to specifically ask for a small, insignificant waiter like me to deliver them. You better sharpen up and serve them carefully, we can't afford to offend the guests in this VIP room. When I went to the bar counter to get the drinks, the manager repeatedly cautioned me in my ear, as if afraid I'd make a mistake and upset the guests. Looking at the red wine in my hand, worth over 100,000, I couldn't help but wonder about the identity of the guests in the room. Arriving at the VIP room door, I knocked. Hearing someone inside say, "Come in," I pushed open the door. At that moment, 7 or 8 people were seated in the VIP room, socializing over drinks and toasts, and the atmosphere was lively. Seated in the main spot was none other than Grant, whom I had encountered earlier at the restroom entrance. Kyle was seated next to Grant. The others were also regulars at the bar, well-known trust fund kids from Fairview. Grant was the center of attention, surrounded by everyone deliberately flattering and trying to curry favor with him. I couldn't help but narrow my eyes. If I had just been wondering why someone would specifically request me to deliver the drinks, seeing Grant and Kyle now made everything clear. What surprised me, however, was this. Ever since I entered the VIP room, Grant and Kyle had been chatting amongst themselves, seemingly not having noticed me. Was I overthinking it? Why are you just standing there? Hurry up and get over here. The person by the door frowned when he saw me standing still. I walked over, placed the red wine bottle on the coffee table, and bowed slightly. "Enjoy your drinks, gentlemen." After saying that, I took 2 steps back, intending to turn and leave. "Stop." Suddenly, Kyle, who hadn't paid any attention to me since I appeared, called out to me. A cold smirk appeared on his lips. I knew it. It wouldn't make sense to specifically request me to deliver the drinks and then do nothing, would it? I turned around, putting on my standard professional fake smile. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" But Kyle didn't speak. Instead, he picked up a glass. Then, pointing to the glass, he said to me, "Grant's in a good mood today, this is his treat for you. I bet you've never tasted wine this good, have you? Now, hurry up and thank Grant." Kyle spoke with a condescending, charitable tone. But I didn't miss the ill intent in his eyes, nor the excited, expectant looks from the others. I glanced at the wine bottle on the table and sneered inwardly. The liquor on the table wasn't cheap, but I'd had more expensive drinks before. I'd tasted countless famous wines. Kyle's tone just now clearly treated me like a beggar. All the bottles on the table were red wine bottles, but this glass was filled with a mysterious unknown yellow liquid. Recalling Kyle's malicious gaze, I instantly guessed what was in the glass. Knowing full well, but not revealing it, adopting the mindset of avoiding unnecessary trouble, I bowed slightly. "Thank you, Grant." Grant smugly twitched the corner of his mouth. "Well, drink it then." I smiled. "It's working hours, I can't drink." "I appreciate your kindness, but please, keep the drink for yourself." Kyle's smile vanished. "Grant offering you a drink means he thinks highly of you. How dare you disrespect Grant?" Kyle's voice was laced with menace. Grant's face darkened. He let out a cold snort and said sinisterly, "It seems my influence, Grant Sullivan's influence, isn't great enough. A mere bar waiter doesn't show me any respect." Only then did I realize that this Grant's real name was Grant Sullivan. The atmosphere in the VIP room abruptly changed. The previously boisterous VIP room suddenly fell silent, so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Everyone's gaze towards me also changed. It was as if they were looking at someone who was foolishly courting disaster. Kyle suddenly slammed an empty glass hard onto the floor, pointing at me as he said, "Damn it, insulting my generosity. Today, whether you want to or not, you're drinking this." I sneered inwardly. I've been too low-key for too long, now even insignificant lowlifes dare to point their fingers at my face and threaten me. Shedding my previous humility, I slowly straightened up. I looked around, all I saw were gleeful and expectant gazes. Of course, these trust fund kids always found amusement in tormenting others. Now that there was ready-made entertainment right in front of them, they couldn't wait to see me make a fool of myself. I raised an eyebrow at Kyle. "What if I don't drink it?" Kyle exploded in anger. Scoffs. "You ungrateful good-for-nothing loser house husband." My heart skipped a beat. Loser house husband? So, Kyle deliberately troubled me because he recognized my identity and wanted to curry favor with Grant Sullivan. What? A loser house husband? He's the Bella Corporation's kept man? Except for Grant Sullivan, who already knew, everyone else present couldn't help but whisper among themselves. There was only one person in all of Fairview who could be called a loser house husband. That was Ethan, the Bella Corporation's good-for-nothing live-in husband. Who didn't react with disdain and contempt at the mention of Ethan's name? 3 years ago, when Isabella, Fairview's reigning beauty, married me, a man with no money, no power, and no redeeming qualities, she instantly became the laughingstock of the entire city. Because of this, Isabella hid at my family's home for half a year, never stepping out. This was also why Isabella had always been cold towards me. Originally, the others' gazes towards me were merely schadenfreude, but now they held more disdain and contempt. However, facing the sneers and taunts of the crowd, I remained unfazed, standing calmly in place as if nothing was wrong. I knew everyone looked down on me, including my Isabella. Everyone thought I was just a good-for-nothing, with no money, no power, and no redeeming qualities. But they had no idea my true identity was far beyond their imagination. They also didn't know the Bella Corporation's meteoric rise from obscurity to a leading tech giant in Fairview over the past 3 years was entirely due to my quiet support from behind the scenes. Although I had temporarily left Metropolis, my connections were still intact. Only, no one knew this. You're asking for trouble. Hold him down for me. Today, even if we have to force it down, he's going to drink it. Grant Sullivan shot a glance at the 2 tall, burly bodyguards behind him, and they immediately understood. They strode forward, powerfully pinning down my arms, one on each side. The bodyguards were very strong, my arms ached from being pinned down. Yet, I remained completely composed, showing no fear. I advise you to let me go, or you'll regret it. To my surprise, Grant Sullivan scoffed, as if he'd heard the funniest joke. Regret? Let me tell you, the word regret has never existed in my dictionary. With that, he stood up from the sofa, holding the glass, and approached me step by step. I narrowed my eyes, watching the approaching Grant Sullivan with a cold gaze. As Grant Sullivan drew closer, the faint, almost imperceptible, urine-like odor became more distinct. I looked at the glass and sneered inwardly. Indeed, my guess was right. Grant Sullivan stopped a step away from me. He slowly bent down, purposely leaning close to my ear as he spoke, his eyes mocking. You're a good-for-nothing, and you still don't admit it? What kind of man are you? 3 years of marriage, and Isabella wouldn't even let you lay a hand on her. Sleeping alone isn't a very pleasant feeling, is it? My pupils constricted sharply. My clenched fists audibly creaked. A burst of laughter erupted around us. Everyone present was pointing at me, whispering amongst themselves, their eyes openly mocking. However, Grant Sullivan still seemed unsatisfied and continued to provoke me. I really have to thank you for being such a good-for-nothing. It allowed me to get a good deal. You must have no idea how wild your Isabella really is in bed, do you? After saying that, Grant Sullivan smacked his lips twice, a lewd expression on his face, as if savoring the memory. My body trembled uncontrollably, and my blood seemed to boil. In that instant, I could no longer remain calm. Since Grant Sullivan was actively courting disaster, I saw no reason not to oblige him. With a sudden burst of strength, I broke free from the 2 bodyguards' hold. Under everyone's terrified and disbelieving gazes, I picked up the wine bottle from the table and smashed it down hard on Grant Sullivan's head. Crash! The wine bottle shattered on impact. I warned you. I told you, you'd regret messing with me. Provoke me? This is what happens. I held up the broken half of the wine bottle, my eyes sharp. In that moment, everyone was intimidated by the powerful aura emanating from me. Ah! Grant Sullivan clutched his head, letting out a horrific wail. Kyle was the first to react, his eyes wide with horror as he shrieked. Grant! The others also seemed to wake from a dream, staring in horror at Grant Sullivan's bleeding forehead. He's crazy, completely insane. Ethan, you must have a death wish. How dare you hit Grant? Do you even know who Grant is? You're finished. Everyone looked at me as if I were a dead man walking. Ethan, you dared to hit me? Grant Sullivan's chest heaved violently, his eyes bloodshot, glaring at me with uncontrollable fury, as if he wanted to tear me to shreds. After hitting him, I actually felt calm. Because of that agreement years ago, I had endured silently for 3 years. With that single smash, the long-standing gloom that had been suffocating me felt completely swept away. I felt much lighter. Ignoring Grant Sullivan's hysterical roar, I scoffed. So what if I hit you? Grant Sullivan choked, so enraged he nearly couldn't catch his breath, his finger trembling as he pointed at me. What's wrong? Ethan, if I don't beat you until you're spitting teeth and make you grovel and call me grandpa today, then my name isn't Sullivan. I couldn't help but laugh aloud. No thanks. I don't have a grandson as old as you. You. Grant Sullivan's face flushed crimson. He pointed at me, stuttering, you. For a long time, unable to utter another word. Just then, a surprised female voice came from the VIP room entrance. Oh. Grant, how did you get hurt? My heart gave a sharp thump. This voice, I knew all too well, it was my Isabella. Isabella came running, anxiously examining Grant Sullivan's still bleeding wound. Who was reckless enough to hit our Grant? Isabella demanded angrily. Everyone's gaze simultaneously turned towards me. Isabella followed their gazes, her eyes meeting my mocking, half-smiling stare. Isabella froze, then frowned, her tone disgusted. What are you doing here? In that instant, the disgust in Isabella's eyes was undisguised, as if I were some loathsome, dirty thing. I had long grown accustomed to Isabella's disgust towards me. I didn't answer Isabella's question. Instead, I raised an eyebrow at her mockingly. So this is the, I don't know him, you were talking about? Following my scornful gaze, Isabella finally noticed that she was still intimately holding onto Grant Sullivan's arm. Isabella instinctively tried to release Grant Sullivan, but then seemed to recall something, and instead, defiantly tightened her grip. Isabella, you're just in time. Your dog bit someone indiscriminately. If you don't give me an explanation today, the Bella Corporation won't have an easy time either. Grant Sullivan's words made Isabella's face change, and her gaze towards me became even more disgusted. Ethan, are you insane? Do you know who Grant is? You're courting death yourself, but can you please not drag the Bella Corporation down with you? Now, hurry up and get on your knees and apologize to Grant. Isabella had never treated me as her husband, her tone was like scolding a disobedient stray dog. Suddenly, I felt utterly disheartened, like a complete joke. My own wife was actually forcing me, without any discernment, to get on your knees and apologize to an outsider. What if I don't? This was the first time I had ever defied Isabella, and in front of so many people. Isabella angrily said, if you don't kneel, I'll divorce you. Divorce? Repeating those two words, I suddenly burst out laughing. What are you laughing at? Isabella asked, somewhat enraged and embarrassed. You've wanted to divorce me for a long time, haven't you? I gazed mockingly at Isabella and Grant Sullivan, who were still intimately standing together. Anyone unaware would think they were the married couple. I had thought Isabella would be flustered after her intentions were exposed, but I underestimated her brazenness. Isabella admitted it openly. That's right. Let me tell you, from the very first day I married you, I've been thinking about divorcing you every single moment. I'm Fairview's universally acclaimed beauty. Only a man with wealth, power, and noble status like Grant is worthy of being my husband. If not for the circumstances at the time, do you think I would have married a useless country bumpkin good-for-nothing like you? Do you know that every second I spent with you was torment? Just seeing you made me sick to my stomach. Isabella mercilessly twisted the knife in my heart, again and again. 3 years of wholehearted, selfless devotion had ultimately been misplaced. Did you hear that, bumpkin? Your Isabella is so disgusted by you she wants to vomit. Grant Sullivan laughed wildly. He wrapped his arm around Isabella, his greasy hand not forgetting to squeeze her slender waist. However, Isabella not only didn't get angry, but instead giggled and leaned closer into Grant Sullivan's embrace. Isabella and I had been married for 3 years, and I had never even held her hand. But now, Isabella was allowing herself to laugh flirtatiously in another man's arms. I wonder if she would still be able to laugh like this if she knew what that man said about her behind her back. I suddenly felt a sense of anticipation. I lowered my gaze and chuckled softly. When I looked up again, there was no warmth left in my eyes as I looked at Isabella. Divorce is fine, but an apology is absolutely out of the question. Isabella's face was filled with shock. Her eyes widened in disbelief, as if she couldn't trust her own ears. Not only did I not kneel and beg for forgiveness, but I also agreed to divorce? You really agree to divorce? Isabella couldn't help but confirm with me again. That's right. Didn't you say I wasn't good enough for you? Now, I'll grant your wish. I just hope you won't regret it later. I could single-handedly support the Bella Corporation's growth and expansion, and I could just as easily bring it back to square one. Years ago, because I promised my good friend Liam his dying wish, I was determined to marry his sister, Isabella. However, my family disagreed. Besides being socially mismatched, the most important thing was that everyone could see Isabella didn't love me. The final agreement was that Isabella and I wouldn't officially register our marriage yet. For a period of 3 years, I wasn't allowed to reveal my identity. If, after 3 years, Isabella fell in love with me and wanted to continue, and I still wanted to marry her, then my family would no longer object. Today happened to be the day the 3-year agreement expired, and also my 3-year wedding anniversary with Isabella. Originally, I had been planning to tell her my true identity tonight. But unexpectedly, Isabella gave me the gift of being cuckolded as our wedding anniversary present instead. Since that was the case, there was no longer any need for this marriage to continue. We didn't even need to go for the divorce papers. In that moment, I felt no disappointment. Instead, my heart was filled with a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. Now that your business is settled, shouldn't we settle ours? Grant Sullivan spat on the ground. Everyone around us looked as if they were watching a show, all waiting to see me make a fool of myself. I smiled, calmly walked to an empty sofa, and sat down. All right, I happen to have a score to settle with you too. Originally, I didn't want to bother with a mad dog, but this mad dog kept hounding me. Now I've changed my mind. Grant Sullivan gave me the grand gift of being cuckolded. How could I not return the favor? Everyone looked at me as if I were an idiot. I knew what they were thinking, they simply thought I was insane. Grant Sullivan stared at me in disbelief, his eyes wide as if they were about to pop out. What did you say? Settle a score with me? Grant Sullivan picked at his ear, then took 2 steps closer to me. As if he suspected there was something wrong with his hearing. You heard right. I said with a smile. Bumpkin, do you know who you're talking to? No, I don't. I shook my head. Everyone kept asking if I knew who Grant was. But no one ever told me. And I truly hadn't heard of such a figure in Fairview. Ethan, Grant is the actual nephew of the head of the Sullivan family in Metropolis. It was Isabella who finally cleared up the confusion for me. Isabella wasn't even married to Grant Sullivan yet, but she already acted as if she shared his glory. The Sullivan family in Metropolis. I do know about them. One of the recently risen 4 prominent families in Metropolis. No wonder this Grant Sullivan was so arrogant. No wonder Isabella was so determined to divorce me, she thought she had snagged a better catch. But there's always a bigger fish. Compared to the Ling family, the Sullivan family's foundation and influence were simply insignificant. Isabella was throwing away a watermelon to pick up a sesame seed, she had no idea what she was missing. How about it? Scared now? Do you believe I can make you disappear before sunrise tomorrow? If you're scared, then get on the floor and bark for me like a dog. You can get up when I'm satisfied. Or, drink this glass, then crawl under my legs. Grant Sullivan pointed proudly at his crotch. But my expression didn't change. Then do you know who I am? Do you believe I can make sure you don't even see tonight's moon? You won't believe it until it's too late. Saying this, Grant Sullivan pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Uncle Sullivan, I got beaten up. What? Who has the nerve to hit someone from the Sullivan family? Wait there. Uncle Sullivan is coming right now. Grant Sullivan purposely put it on speakerphone, and everyone clearly heard the middle-aged man's words. Everyone looked at me with a "you're dead meat" expression. Yet, I remained as calm as ever, not a trace of fear on my face. I unhurriedly pulled out my cell phone. 10 minutes. The Celestial Bar, VIP room 5203. Calling for backup? Anyone can do that. Julian Thorne only stated the time and location, hanging up before even mentioning what the matter was. You're just bluffing. Kevin sneered dismissively. Sarah also looked as if she'd heard a joke, mocking him aloud. Julian Thorne, I never knew you were such a show-off. Considering our past marriage, Julian Thorne, I advise you to know what's good for you. It's not too late to get on your knees and beg for mercy. Exactly, exactly. You're a total loser, so who do you think you are? Others chimed in with agreement. Facing their cold mockery and sneers, Julian Thorne remained calm, sitting there composed. He simply glanced at my wristwatch, silently counting the minutes. 10 minutes later, a flurry of footsteps sounded from outside the private room. Then, the private room door was forcefully pushed open. A group of bodyguards strode in. Richard Sullivan walked in the middle, his expression grim, his eyes sharp, and his presence commanding. Mike followed Richard Sullivan, fawning and plastered with a smile. With their arrival, the atmosphere in the private room shifted entirely. The previously noisy private room was now in pin-drop silence. Everyone held their breath with extreme caution. Chad, seeing the newcomers, his initial surprise quickly turned into utter delight as he exclaimed, "Uncle Richard! Uncle Richard, what are you doing here?" Chad hadn't expected Uncle Richard to come in person. "Julian Thorne was just in Riverwood for some business, and when I heard you were in trouble, I came right over." "Who hit you?" Richard Sullivan had only Chad as a nephew and had doted on him like his own son since childhood. Seeing the bloody wound on Chad's forehead, he became enraged. "This loser." Richard Sullivan followed Chad's pointing finger and looked at Julian Thorne, his face etched with murderous intent. Julian Thorne, however, showed no fear, merely offering a faint smile. "Kid, you've got guts. You dared to touch someone from the Thorne family." Richard Sullivan's voice was low, as if squeezed from his throat. "Considering you're just a junior, Julian Thorne won't make things too difficult for you. Whichever hand you used to hit him, disable that hand yourself." Julian Thorne couldn't help but laugh out loud. They truly were cut from the same cloth. Richard Sullivan and Chad had the exact same way of doing things. What if Julian Thorne doesn't? Julian Thorne licked his lips, asking with a smile. "Then today, it won't just be one of your hands you leave behind." Though Richard Sullivan's expression was bland as he spoke, it inexplicably made one feel a chilling dread. Just then, another set of footsteps sounded from the doorway. "Richard Sullivan, that's quite a boast. Aren't you afraid of biting off more than you can chew?" The voice grew closer. No sooner had the words fallen than the door was again flung open. A group of security personnel in black suits strode in. Unlike the Thorne family's bodyguards, these bodyguards clearly looked well-trained and agile. Just by standing there, their presence alone was enough to win. The person leading them was Alfred, dressed in a well-tailored suit. He looked like an ordinary old man. It was he who had just spoken. With Uncle Richard backing him, Chad clearly no longer paid any mind to anyone else. "Old man, who the hell are you? Mind your own business." However, as Alfred approached, Richard Sullivan's eyes suddenly changed, his previous arrogance gone. He actually bent obsequiously and ran to Alfred, a flattering smile plastered on his face. "Alfred, what brings you here?" This sudden change took everyone by surprise. The esteemed head of one of the 4 leading families of Metropolis, bowing and fawning before an Alfred who couldn't be more ordinary. Chad, in particular, watched the scene before him, utterly dumbfounded. He rubbed his eyes hard, as if doubting whether he was hallucinating. But Alfred didn't even spare Richard Sullivan a glance, walking straight to Julian Thorne's side, bowing respectfully, and saying, "Sir." Julian Thorne nodded lightly in acknowledgement. Everyone present was a savvy individual and immediately sensed something was amiss. Everyone's minds raced. Metropolis Thorne family? Mr. Thorne? Julian Thorne also had the surname Thorne. If they remembered correctly, the current head of the Thorne family was also named Julian Thorne. Before, no one had connected the two, assuming it was merely a coincidence of names. Who was Mr. Thorne? He was someone who stood at the pinnacle of the business world in Metropolis. He represented the most supreme status in the commercial and financial world. Because he never showed his face in public, no one had ever seen his true appearance. Thus, he had become a legendary figure. Everyone cast incredulous glances at Julian Thorne. "Sir? How can this be? He's clearly just a poor, powerless loser, a kept man." Sarah's voice trembled, her reaction more intense than anyone else's. No matter what, she couldn't believe Julian Thorne was a sir from a wealthy family, let alone that legendary figure. "Exactly, he's just a country bumpkin." Chad's reaction was the same as Sarah's. However, before he could finish his sentence, he was met with a hard slap across the face from Richard Sullivan. "Why the hell don't you shut your stinking mouth? Are you trying to get me killed?" Richard Sullivan's slap was incredibly forceful, knocking Chad's face sideways. "Uncle Richard?" Chad clutched his face in disbelief. Richard Sullivan's face was flushed, and his body trembled. Chad had never seen him in such an utterly terrified state before. Only that person could make Uncle Richard react like this. The moment he realized this, Chad's face turned ashen. Richard Sullivan just boasted he'd take Mr. Thorne's hand, didn't he? Why aren't you doing it? Julian Thorne is really curious to see how Richard Sullivan plans to take Mr. Thorne's hand. Even though Alfred was just a steward, he was always respectful towards Julian Thorne. He was a loyal servant who had served 3 generations of Thorne family heads. Who outside wouldn't respectfully call him Alfred? When he frowned, he exuded an inherent authority. A misunderstanding. A grave misunderstanding. Even if Julian Thorne had 100 times the courage, Julian Thorne wouldn't dare to touch Mr. Thorne. It was Julian Thorne's oversight. Julian Thorne failed to recognize Mr. Thorne. Mr. Thorne, please be magnanimous and overlook my foolishness this time. Richard Sullivan bowed, constantly wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. Turning around, he roared at the still dazed Chad. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and get over here to apologize to Mr. Thorne. Chad flinched, then scrambled on his hands and knees to Julian Thorne's feet. Mr. Thorne, I'm sorry. Julian Thorne was wrong. Julian Thorne was blind. Please overlook my foolishness and forgive Julian Thorne this time. Julian Thorne smiled, imitating Chad's earlier actions, leaning close to his ear as he spoke. Chad is too humble. You have such sharp eyes. Always staring at pretty faces. Is playing with someone else's wife particularly enjoyable? Chad's pupils suddenly constricted, then dilated. At this moment, he finally realized the gravity of the situation. He kept kneeling and bowing repeatedly to Julian Thorne. Mr. Thorne, Julian Thorne was wrong. Julian Thorne was truly wrong. Here, Julian Thorne will return her to you right now. Please just forgive Julian Thorne this one time. Chad clung to Julian Thorne's shoe tip, tears streaming down his face. He truly knew he was wrong. He used to think Uncle Richard was omnipotent. Only today did he realize that there were always greater powers. Julian Thorne kicked Chad away in disgust. Do you take Julian Thorne for a dumpster? That Julian Thorne would want used goods you've played with? Chad's heart sank, and he trembled like a leaf. Julian Thorne. Sarah blushed crimson with shame and fury. Julian Thorne had always been the one she freely humiliated. When had she ever been publicly humiliated by Julian Thorne? Julian Thorne's words just now felt like a resounding slap in her face in front of everyone. Chad's eyes darted around, then he pointed at Sarah and said, "It was her. This slut seduced Julian Thorne." Julian Thorne was just momentarily confused. Sarah hadn't expected Chad to be such a spineless wimp, pushing all the blame onto her. "You're lying. You were the one who seduced Julian Thorne. It was clearly you who made your move because of my looks, saying you'd help Julian Thorne connect the White Corporation to expand in Metropolis. Otherwise, why would Julian Thorne ever look at a shorty like you?" The two of them exchanged accusations, attacking each other. "Enough." Julian Thorne's face darkened. "Julian Thorne doesn't have the time or interest to listen to your petty squabbles." Sarah and Chad were startled into silence simultaneously, but their expressions remained indignant, wishing they could tear each other apart immediately. Julian Thorne's lips curved into a smile, and he said, "It's not impossible for Julian Thorne to forgive you." Chad's eyes lit up. "Do exactly what you demanded Julian Thorne do earlier." Chad looked at the wine glass in front of him, then at his hand, his reluctance painfully obvious. Julian Thorne wasn't in a hurry, leaning back on the sofa and closing his eyes to rest. "What are you hesitating for? Mr. Thorne gave you a chance, and you're not cherishing it. Do you really want us, the Thorne family, to be buried with you?" Richard Sullivan was both anxious and furious, smacking Chad across the face again. Chad steeled himself, picked up the glass of unknown liquid and chugged it. Ugh! Chad couldn't help but retch. Just as he was about to vomit, he looked up and met Julian Thorne's half-smiling eyes. With a gulp, he swallowed it back down. Next, Chad crawled on the floor like a dog and barked 3 times, "Woof! Woof! Woof!" Chad then picked up another wine bottle, but he hesitated, unable to bring himself to strike his own hand. Julian Thorne scoffed. "Get out. Next time you see Julian Thorne, you'd best walk the other way. Otherwise, it won't just be your hand that's broken, but possibly other parts." My gaze lingered meaningfully on his groin. Chad's face turned pale, and he fearfully clutched his crotch. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Richard Sullivan finally breathed a sigh of relief, wiping the sweat from his forehead, and thanked Julian Thorne profusely. He knew that with Julian Thorne's power, to bring down the Thorne family would be a mere word. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Chad scrambled away in terror, leaving with Richard Sullivan. Chad? Don't go. What will Julian Thorne do if you leave? Kevin shivered, watching Chad's retreating back, almost crying from desperation. But Chad was too busy saving himself, he had no time to worry about others. Meeting Julian Thorne's half-smiling gaze, Kevin's knees buckled, and he dropped to the floor. Woof, woof, woof. The others with him followed suit, kneeling down with thuds and barking like dogs. Julian Thorne couldn't help but frown. So noisy. With a slight raise of his hand, Julian Thorne signaled to the bodyguards behind him. Kevin enjoys spiked drinks, make sure to give him a good welcome. The bodyguards understood, stepping forward, please. Before long, sounds of retching could be heard from outside the private room door. Julian Thorne raised a hand to cover his nose and mouth in distaste. Let's go. As they passed Sarah, she stared at Julian Thorne with complex emotions. Julian Thorne. But Julian Thorne ignored her call, not even sparing her an extra glance as he left directly. Outside the bar, a line of black Maybachs was parked. Alfred opened the door of the middle car for Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne bent down and got in. Just as Alfred was closing the car door, Sarah's urgent voice came from behind. Wait. Sarah ran frantically, her breathing ragged. She pushed past Alfred, who was by the car door, and squeezed to the front of the car, incessantly pounding on the car window. Julian Thorne. You can't abandon Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne is your wife. Julian Thorne truly didn't know how Sarah had the audacity to say that, as if nothing had happened moments ago. Julian Thorne rolled down the window, reminding her emotionlessly. You were, but as of just now, you're not anymore. With that, Julian Thorne instructed the driver to drive. The car slowly began to move forward. Sarah clung to the car window, not letting go, jogging alongside the car. Julian Thorne was wrong. Julian Thorne truly knows Julian Thorne was wrong. Just forgive Julian Thorne this one time, okay? Let's start over. You like children, don't you? Julian Thorne will have your children, as many as you want, okay? Sarah was filled with regret, looking at Julian Thorne with eyes full of hope. No. Julian Thorne coldly refused without hesitation. All across Metropolis, the women who want to have Julian Thorne's children could circle the city limits 3 times over. Sarah, why do you think Julian Thorne would want a woman who betrayed Julian Thorne to bear Julian Thorne's children? In that instant, Sarah blushed crimson, her face filled with humiliation. But if you leave, what will Julian Thorne do? What about the White Corporation? Didn't you promise my brother you'd look after me and protect the White Corporation? Sarah's face was streaked with tears of regret. Julian Thorne sneered. That's right, Julian Thorne did promise your brother. And Julian Thorne kept that promise. If it weren't for Julian Thorne, do you think the White Corporation would be where it is today? But how did you treat Julian Thorne? It was you who bit off more than you could chew, failing to cherish what you had. My 3 years of devotion were thrown away on you. For your brother's sake, Julian Thorne won't do anything to you, nor will Julian Thorne make a move against the White Corporation. From now on, we're done with each other. We go our separate ways. With these words, Sarah understood that there was truly no possibility left between her and Julian Thorne. Like a deflated balloon, Sarah's body went limp, and she collapsed onto the ground. The car accelerated, and soon Sarah's figure grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared from view. After that, Julian Thorne never saw Sarah again, nor did he intentionally pay attention to news about her or the White Corporation. It wasn't until one day, half a year later, that Julian Thorne saw news about her on his phone. Sarah was in prison for intentional assault. It turned out that after Julian Thorne left, without Julian Thorne's care, the White Corporation quickly fell into decline. Sarah was exhausted and unable to turn the tide. The White Corporation eventually went bankrupt, and Sarah was deeply in debt. She blamed Chad for everything. If it weren't for Chad, she would still be Julian Thorne's wife, the rightful mistress of the Thorne family in Metropolis, enjoying endless wealth and prestige. Because of Chad, Sarah was now met with scorn and ridicule wherever she went. And now, even her company was gone. But Chad? He was still living his carefree life as a prominent sir. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she couldn't stomach it. So, Sarah waited for several days in places Chad frequently visited, finally seizing an opportunity. She took out a pre-prepared fruit knife and fiercely stabbed Chad. The knife struck Chad's groin. Chad bled profusely on the spot. Despite being rushed to the hospital in time, due to the severity of his injuries, Chad completely lost his ability to be a man. Sarah was taken away by the police, but she laughed maniacally. She felt the triumphant satisfaction of revenge. However, years of imprisonment awaited her. Closing his phone, Julian Thorne's heart was surprisingly calm. As for Chad, he abused his family's influence to cause trouble, so trouble was bound to find him sooner or later. Regarding Sarah, Julian Thorne could only feel pity for her. She had a good hand but played it terribly. It truly was, as they say, she brought it on herself. What's done is done. Julian Thorne and Sarah were like two intersecting lines. After a brief convergence, they would ultimately go their separate ways.